Welcome to the Rise to the Challenge podcast. Joined today, he's an author, speaker, and coach. It's Dai Manuel. How are you doing today, Dai?
Fantastic, Alex. Honestly, like really fantastic. Because I know we were talking before we hit record today, and I think I must have rebooked with you like 3, maybe 4 times. And so I just feel like this has been the conversation that's been meaning to happen. And I've been feeling so drawn and excited about this because I'm like, to postpone that many times and yet you still allow me to come back. I'm like, you're a good man and I'm excited to talk to you. So thank you.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning and talk about where you're from and what were you involved in growing up?
Oh, geez. Great question. Let's just go right back. Now I got to go way back. You know, like I'm on my, as I say, 46th lap around the sun. So we're going to go back a few decades, right? And so I was born in 76. So mid 70s, you know, really an 80s kid. And so anybody that's into Stranger Things or anything else like Back to the Future and all that stuff, that's the 80s. Okay. And that's when I was really thriving as a teen. But also it's when I endured, or I should say, suffered through one of my very first big challenges in life. And, you know, at age 9, my parents separated and ultimately divorced. And, you know, back then, I mean, divorce today, I mean, the statistics are scary. There's more people divorcing than getting married, right? And I mean, that's intimidating, but also really alarming. And you gotta, you know, taking this back about 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, you know, there was one other kid in my entire class of 30 kids that had parents that were separated or divorced, you know? So just to sort of shift contextually what I'm talking about here and sort of that impact, because now there's a lot more resources, especially, you know, we talk about mental health today, like every other word, you know, like it's a conversation that we're all engaging in and it's becoming far less stigmatized. And so back then, you know, at age 9, my parents dropping the bomb on my brother and I, my brother being younger. My brother's kind of like the easygoing dude. He's just like super chill. He's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that means we get double the Christmas gifts, right? You know, and I'm like, you know, at 7 years old, I'm like, dude, I like you, you know, like, that's pretty good. But for me, it was a lot more dramatic and traumatic. And long and short of it, over the next 5 years after that, I learned to cope with some of that trauma the only way I knew how at that time, which was through movies, video games, and eating certain types of foods. You know, now these aren't like I was loading up on salads, okay? Like I was eating a lot of very nutrition poor yet calorie rich foods. And so you can imagine 5 years of that lifestyle, it compounded. And I remember very distinctively, Alex, being at the doctor with my mom. And this is around 14 years old. And I remember pulling my mom outside of the office. And, you know, it's funny how doctors work, right? They leave the door ajar just enough.
Yeah.
So I'm in there, right? And I can hear them talking. And I remember saying, Betty Ann, you're Dai. He's morbidly obese.
Wow.
Now, Alex, just to sort of put this blankly, you know, I didn't understand what morbidly meant, nor did I understand what obese meant at that time. But I was like, no, that can't be a good thing, you know, like, and sure enough, it wasn't. But it was also very reflective of my mental health at that time. You know, you talk about being in a physical state of unhealth. I was also mentally unhealthy. And I'd go as far as saying spiritually unhealthy and emotionally unhealthy, just because I bottled everything up. And the only way I learned to cope with any of the stress and the anxiety and other negative emotions was eating and video games, right? So very internal, very introverted. And yeah, anyways, you know, just to sort of speed up this story a little bit for you, because I know we've got a couple other decades to cover here. I'll get to the short of it. It was the weirdest thing, you know. I remember being at my dad's very distinctly this one day, because, you know, my parents being divorced by this point in time, we would see my dad every other weekend. And so I just remember this one weekend in particular, and I was still 14 at the time, but I was probably about 6 months out of being 15, so about 14 and a half. And I remember coming out of the shower that day and looking at my reflection in the mirror. And this is just to give you an idea, because those that are listening and watching this, you know, I'm sure you can relate to this. We've all been in that place where we avoid mirrors. We avoid looking at a reflection. We avoid photography, right? Like being in anyone's images, photos or whatnot. Like back then, you know, I didn't have to worry about people with smartphones and you know, high pixel phones in their back pocket. So it was really easy to avoid. You know, like I've only got one photo of me back at that age, you know, at 14, morbidly obese, because I used to really isolate myself. I didn't want to be anywhere, you know, where I could feel judged. or ridiculed or made fun of. And here I am, like at 14 and a half years old. And I used to have this hack where I would stay in the shower and turn it on extra steamy. So when I would get out, I wouldn't have to see my reflection. It would be all fogged up. All the condensation would be covering it. So I'd be like, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. I could towel off and then go about my day. This one morning, I had a rush, and I got out and I remember turning and locking eyes with my reflection in the mirror. And then I did the scan, right? Looking all the way down, stopping at my chest, continuing down to my belly. And then I did the upside, right? Coming all the way back up. And I remember just coming back up and just having this uncontrollable sobbing come about me. And it was a sad moment because I was contemplating, wouldn't it be a lot easier just not to be here, And on the flip side, I was also thinking, I don't want to do that. Like the idea of dying scares me. Mm-hmm. In fact, it scares me more to die than the idea of possibly changing. And I can articulate this now, but this is actually what was going through my mind, right? I'm like, well, if I don't like being this way, I know people say that you can change. I know I've seen people that wanted to get healthy. There's enough social proof out there and people that I've directly know that have made lifestyle changes and have improved. So I'm like, maybe I can too, and I came out of that bathroom and I found my dad and I was like, Dad, I really want to get healthy. I don't want to be like this anymore. And he must have seen something in my eyes at that moment. Like I was serious. Like this was like something I really wanted to do for me, because up to that point, like all parents, they want their kids to be happy, healthy, vibrant. And so you can imagine over those 5 years, because everyone always asks me, well, weren't your parents supportive? Didn't they want to help you with your change? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. They wanted to help me. Every chance they got, they were recommending, like, well, why don't we get you a nutritionist? Or why don't we change how we're eating? Why don't we try this? Why don't we get you a personal trainer? Like they were always making these suggestions. But every time they said that, Alex, every time I was like, you just don't think I'm good the way I am. You think I need to change. Like I was so, I was a dick. Okay. I was not I was a teenager. I was unhappy. I was depressed. I was obese on top of that, like I was just, life was, for me at that point in time, very hard, very challenging. And so anytime anybody wanted to help me, I was like, no, you're not nice. And no, I won't change because you want me to change. And my dad saw that morning, I wanted to change for me. And he's like, well, what would you like to do? What do you want to do? Of course I want to help you. What do you want to do? And I was like, well, I like riding bikes. Do you think we can get me a bike? Because I used to remember that, at 7, 8, even at 9 years old, I remember, we used to live out in the country at times before we moved into the city. And, we had lots of land out there and I would just bike, all day and loved it. So I was like, can we get me a bike? And my dad's like, yeah, we can get you a bike. And that afternoon, literally, we went out, bought me a bike. That evening, when we got back, I was out on my first bike ride and I went out every day, just every day. I was like, I'm just going to go out for a short ride every day because I didn't want to go to gym. I don't want to be anywhere public. I wanted to do this on my own. And so that's what I did. And I just committed to that. And man, 20 months later, of course, I changed how I was thinking. I changed my nutrition a little bit from the standpoint. I really just became more mindful of what I was eating and how much of it I was eating. And sure enough, 20 months later, I had released the weight and literally had this massive shift. That was one of the first big challenges in my life that I myself worked through, of course, with some support around me, but came out the other side feeling like, wow, change not only is possible, but I can actually help facilitate it along. Yep. I don't have to be a victim of change anymore. I can actually be a champion of change, and that's sort of how I see it now, because, there's been other challenges in my life that have obviously come, but I always think back to that period and I'm like, okay, well, I was able to work through that change. I know I can do this again. So that's that internal belief that's been built based on past experiences. So, as I fast forward through the rest of my life, the next 30 years, and it's had its challenges too, as my TEDx talk hints at, I've struggled with alcohol and narcotics and autoimmune issues and oh my gosh, you name it, I've probably done it. and so we can get to that in the second year, but I thought it would be valuable to at least share that origin story because you asked me. So I really appreciate the trip down memory lane, so to speak.
You talked about divorce, and my parents got divorced when I was 3, so it's different. Wow. We both had different ways that we went because I was much younger. Do you think, looking at a hypothetical, if you were much younger, do you think that the trauma would affect you more? Because at the age of 9, 10, you're much older. You kind of are more aware of what's going on around. And especially nowadays, if a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, social media, something on the internet's going to pop up, and that's going to just make it change big time. But for you, do you think if you were younger or maybe even older when it happened, that it would play more of an effect and you might have not gone through the trauma?
I think it's probably safe to say that if I was younger, I would have probably adapted a bit more quickly and maybe not have gone necessarily the direction that I did go. Because really I went internal, right? I was like, I just internalized that trauma and dealt with it the only way I could figure out how to deal with it. And it was through food and video games. Like literally it's dopamine hits and getting my blood sugar to a point where I get a little bit of a high. That's what happens when we eat certain types of sugary foods. We get a bit of a high. We feel good in the moment until later, and then we want more, or we feel depressed. So I just learned how to self-medicate with that process. And so if I do think back, if I was younger, it probably would have been different. But if I was older, I don't think it would have been much different. I still think I would have struggled, but maybe things would have been different. I mean, it's one of those things, right? We can go back and say what if all the way we want.
Yes.
And those are really there. But I don't know, like what was the experience like for you? As you became more aware of it, as you aged and became aware of the situation, how did you feel? How did you navigate that?
For me, it's like, well, my parents have been divorced my whole entire life, so it doesn't feel like anything different. And like my mom remarried, but it did, and then she went through another divorce, but that divorce really didn't affect me as much because I was more closer with my mom than the stepfather at that time, and I was still having a good relationship with my dad. And so it just felt like the norm for me. It didn't really bother me because I kind of, as I got older, I kind of controlled the schedule. When did I go see my dad? When was I with my mom? And then when I was able to drive, I got to be able to do both. And so to me, it's like, it depends on the age and how you adapt to it, because if they're both getting along with each other, it definitely helps out. But we see sometimes in these relationships where it doesn't go that way. Even we see on TV shows. So it's all depends on that family situation, because you can't say, oh, well, he said it worked for him, but that's because it was in how I related to it, adapt to it. So we all have different stories that it goes with.
We sure do. It's awesome though. I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong. It's all highly subjective, right? Based on the situation we find ourselves, our upbringing. I mean, that whole idea of nature versus nurture, right? Like it's I was gonna say it's a slippery slope when you start going down that path and trying to I don't know. Sometimes I think it's really interesting because we sort of have that confirmation bias, that capability of where we have some ideas or assumptions, and then we just automatically look to prove that, right? As being true without, taking the same amount of energy to prove that maybe it's not true, and I'm guilty of that. I find myself down that path a lot. So I'm like, be mindful of that. Be mindful. Anyways, this is cool. I like it.
You mentioned when the first time you got the bike, it kind of started that change, and you talked about being more isolated. Did you feel that as you gotten older after you got that bike, you saw a different mentality change? Were you going out a little bit more? Were friends seeing a different change in you? Did you start finding new passions, skills, and things like that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was as soon as I started to feel the change and really own it, meaning that I was recognizing that my new actions that I was taking in place of what I used to be doing was actually creating a positive change, like literally, and that's the thing with I like using health as a primary example of how do we experience change. And I mean, it works really well when we want to get healthy, but people don't realize it also works the opposite direction, right? Like it's not necessarily something that happens immediately.
We wish.
I know, right? Because I always tell people, if you went to McDonald's and you had a Big Mac meal, and after that Big Mac meal, you put on 20 pounds instantly, and your cholesterol levels jump 10 points, then maybe you would not eat it, because the repercussions are felt instantly, right? But it's not that way, and I'm not here to vilify McDonald's. Please don't take the context here, but I do recognize that it's convenience food, right? It's super easy, but it's made in mass, and it's very low in nutritional value. And listen, I survived off that stuff for a long time in my life, you know, and it led me to a very negative situation. And I think when I think back on it, I isolated myself based on lack of confidence is a big one, but I also had a very low self-opinion of myself on top of that, you know, and the two aren't mutually exclusive, you know, like they're two very negative states of looking at oneself, you know. Yep. And based on that, I found it easier to isolate. Now, I had some friends and we would get together occasionally, but I was never fully expressing myself, you know, and I was often looking to play video games or watch movies. So, I mean, how much interaction do you have when that's happening, right? So that was comfortable. It was comfortable. It was easy. And, but as I started to exercise, right, and that's the cool thing about exercise. So one thing that is instant is, and I still live by this today, I know that, you know, I'm only ever one workout away from feeling better. And just like certain foods, by eating them creates this positive emotional upswing, right? Like you eat something sugary when you're feeling pretty low in energy, and yeah, almost instantly you're like, woo, perked up. Now, 5-10 minutes later, you might be right back where you were, but regardless, very effective. Well, fitness has the same sort of effectiveness. You know, you get our heart rate's elevated. We move our body with a bit of purpose, you know, 5, 10, 15 minutes. You can't help but feel good after that, because it also creates, excuse me, a positive endorphin shift, right? Like it creates a little bit of increased blood flow to the brain. It also gets the body moving. It reduces a little bit of inflammation. On top of that, you know, it gets our metabolism moving a little bit more, so we may feel a bit more alert, but ultimately it helps increase energy. And people often think, oh, if I exercise, I'm going to reduce energy. I'm actually going to be expending energy. And it actually does the opposite.
Yeah.
It creates more energy, you know, and it's instant. And that's how we know it's a good thing for us, right? Because it's instant and it actually helps improve quality of life, but also our mental state. So long and short of it, as I was working out and as I was experiencing these positive shifts based on the choices and the actions I was making, I started to gain more confidence in myself. And as I was gaining more confidence in myself, I also found that I was becoming a little bit more expressive. I was open to continuing a conversation. I wasn't just giving yes, no answers, right? I was experimenting with being more than the introverted self that I became very accustomed to being. And as such, as I was changing and started to express myself, some people started to invite me to participate in some group activities, even going to a party, you know, and stuff like that, which is new to me at 16 years of age. And also, Alex, a lot of people say, well, what was the real motivation, Dai? And I'm like, well, to be honest, you know, at that age, and as a man who identifies as a man, I wanted a girl to want me. You know, that is what I wanted, you know, and it really, the underlying tone there is I just wanted to be wanted. You know, I wanted to be loved. And at that point, I didn't see the value in me. And if I couldn't see the value in me, how could anybody else see that? You know, and it's interesting because, I mean, as much as I'm talking about this when I was a teenager, gosh, I struggled with the same thing, you know, as I've aged. You know, I don't think it's anything that we just automatically eliminate entirely. We all go there from time to time, you know, and then, so as I started to associate with different people, that also had certain influence on me. Certain peer pressure, of course. You know, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd for a period of time, and they liked to party, but I loved the attention I was getting. I was getting invited to these things. And also because, you know, I kickstarted my puberty. And so within that 18 to 20 months, I had lost some weight, but I had also gained a lot of that back, but as muscle and height, you know, so I was now one of the bigger guys in class. And so based on that, I was starting to get attention and get invited to certain things. And this one group, I you know, got sucked in and started doing things that I would never normally do. And I was definitely acting out, and as a way of trying to fit in. And you know, eventually that changed when I realized I was just being used and abused, quite literally, and made some changes, found a better crowd. And by that point, I was graduating. I was like, you know what, I'm done with this town. And I grew up in a small town, just outside of Toronto. And I was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to move to Vancouver. So that's like going from Toronto to Vancouver. It's literally going from one side of the country to the other side. And I have never looked back, you know. So that was at age 18. I was like, peace out, Ontario. I'm going to Vancouver, Western Canada, and that will be my new home. And it was also a great place for me to start over and start fresh without anybody knowing my background, my history, no one ever thinking about me as being morbidly obese, because that was a stigma that was very challenging to shake, you know, within a small community. It just was, you know, a lot of the friends that I'd grown up with and was in classes with as we progressed through our schooling always knew me as that fat kid, and as such, just had that opinion of me, that sort of, even though I wasn't that anymore and I had changed, and I you know, it's just weird how we act as kids, right? It's just weird.
I always wonder if I went back to like a high school reunion, what did people think of me back then, and how have I changed? Because I feel that I've grown up so much. I mean, you talked about obesity. I was at that in high school, and I didn't find that change or that momentum until I really was having medical issues. As a type 1 diabetic, it started hitting me a lot. And I'm like, I got to do this for me. I can't do it for anyone else. And lost 50 pounds. And I felt the best I've ever felt. And I'm like, well, if I accomplish this, I know I can accomplish anything. And I still, every day when I go work out, even if it's a bike ride, I have one of those Peloton. Well, it's not Peloton. Beautiful. I don't want to get an ad sponsored by unless they want to give me one. But
yeah, there you go.
I bought one of those, and it's just so rewarding, like just so much fun just to take 20 minutes and just enjoy, feel free. And it's been the best thing. You talked about going to Vancouver. What was that dream job that you were wanting?
That's another great question. You know, when I think about what did I want to do, okay. So let's take a step back here for a second, because now you're making me, you know, I appreciate this question. All right. But it changed and it shifted from 18 to 20. And here's why. You know, when I graduated high school, I had set up my last 2 years of schooling to be heavily biased to the sciences. And because I had this intention that I was going, because I even had done a practicum the last 2 years in a veterinarian practice. So I had this intention of being a veterinarian. And so I had set out, and I got into University of British Columbia here in Vancouver, and I got into the agricultural sciences program, because you have to do 1 year in that before you can go into veterinary medicine. And so I'm doing this, I'm going through the path, right? But my main motivation for doing this is because my father was a veterinarian. And, you know, my dad and I never had a very close relationship. We had a good relationship, but it wasn't a great relationship. And we're both somewhat stoic, and at least back then. And you know, we were good with each other, but, you know, we didn't really talk about anything below the surface. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just was very surface. And but I used to remember how he would act when we would get talking about the vet practices, or talking about his practice, talking about his career. You know, you just get excited, you know. And so there was that bonding opportunity when we would have those conversations, and I would see it in his eyes, that the passion and excitement of me possibly following in his footsteps. So that's what I thought I'd do, you know. And but I was doing it largely, if I'm perfectly honest with you, I was doing it for him and for what I thought it would bring us. And after that first year, I really struggled. You know, I was like, I don't want to do this. You know, I hate the sciences. I was failing out because I just wasn't motivated to go to class, and I was just really struggling with it. And you know, this is a funny side note, because after I got through that first year, obviously I shared with my dad how poorly I had done, and they were going to put me on academic probation. That's how bad my grades were, right? Yeah. So it was like, I mean, I showed up to class like less than half the time, right? And I got into rock climbing and other stuff. So I was going off to the mountains, right? And because I was like, I don't really want to do this. I don't want to be a vet, but I didn't know how to tell my dad that. And I remember he came out for a visit, and we got into this conversation, and it was really the first true vulnerable conversation I can remember us having. And we got to talk, and I was just like, you know, Dad, I just don't really want to be a vet. I thought I did, you know, I wanted to do it because I also wanted to make you happy and proud. And I remember him telling me, he's like, Dad, I just want you to be happy. You got to do what's going to make you happy. And I was like, dude, couldn't you told me that a year ago? No, like I'm like, what? No way, and it was really just a great relief to me, but also I'm sure it was a relief to him too, because it was this place where we came to an understanding, but also an acceptance of one another. Him accepting me as me, and me wanting to pursue a different passion, which was in the arts. So I switched into philosophy and English literature. Very, very different, right? Very different. And so I sort of pursued that, and but meanwhile was doing fitness as for my income. I was either personal training, leading spin classes, working at the local rock climbing gym, and then eventually also teaching kickboxing. So I was doing all these little side jobs and classes and stuff just to generate some income for myself while I was going to school. And then eventually I found myself in a position where I started earning commission based on selling fitness equipment. And if you've ever worked in a commission environment, it's really neat because it's performance based.
Yes.
And I remember getting interviewed and I was like, so wait a minute, wait. Okay. Tell me this, Sandra was the manager. I'm like, so you're telling me the more people that come in here that I'm willing to help get healthy, you're going to pay me more? She's like, yeah. I'm like, wait. So the more people I help to get healthy, you're going to pay me more? She's like, yes. I'm like, well, this sounds like a really good job. And so it got me in this, and I excelled, very quickly. Because originally, if you go to school for philosophy, Alex, like it's like teacher or lawyer. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know what else you're going to do with those degrees, right? Like it's it. I mean, you could be an author, which I ultimately wrote a book, but you don't write books to get rich unless you're J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, or somebody like that sells a bajillion books, right? So I realized that, I don't want to be a lawyer, and I don't have the patience to be a teacher. My kids will attest to that. And, and so here I am, finding myself like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And it was okay, right? Because I discovered that I had this knack for doing this. And within that 2 years, my first 2 years there, I was making more than most lawyers, and I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. And it's retail. So it is a little bit like putting on the boxing gloves every morning and stepping in the rings. Retail can be a little bit tiring, but it can be a great career too, but it's again, finding the balance, because it is tough to find that, there is a struggle with the juggle, so to speak, especially if you're working retail type hours. And but yeah, that was it, man. And eventually I got into a place where I had an opportunity to break off from the national chain that I was a part of with one of the joint founding partners, and we formed our own company, and then started down that path, and literally for 17 years was building and scaling a retail company with a business partner, and eventually got to a point where I wasn't wanting to do that anymore. I realized that I'd gone through some other big changes, which we can talk about in a minute, but made a big career shift 6 years ago. Massive, like a full 180. But I'm still doing similar things that I like to do, but I left the retail business and was like, I can't do that anymore. No more. No more brick and mortar. I'm moving, going digital. and it's been a great experience ever since, but obviously a lot of trial and error and learning and growth, right? But such is life.
I remember having one job where I graduated college. I worked at a grocery store through all of the end of high school through college. And then I get the first job. And it was one of those where you had to go into like a Sam's Club or a Costco. Where was I? Yeah, Sam's Clubs or Costco's or Walmart's. And you had to demonstrate products to people and get them to buy it. Well, you get this small salary or hourly. I'm not going to say it's salary because it didn't make much. And then you got bonuses for everything you like people bought. And I'm just doing this. And the funny thing is, the eventual company that I ended up at next, I actually demonstrated the product on my manager, and she remembers me doing it. It was one of these like facial creams, and all I had to do was they basically say, get their hand, and then you have to like rub it to show what it would look like on their face, and it gets all the dirt and stuff. And she's like, I remember you doing that. And I'm like, what a small world. But I look at that, I'm like, it was definitely a learning experience, because I asked you, what was your dream job? Mine was a game show host.
Oh, I love it.
I talked about even before our recording where I got to interview some of my idols. Well, some of those were game show hosts. And I feel like
No.
I'm doing that now, but it took
Wow.
me so long to get there. And so it's just been so much fun to like look back at that and then see where I'm at today.
Oh, maybe you'll be the next guest host on Jeopardy, right? Like,
I would hope
you've got the
so.
first name, you got
Yeah.
Alex. Like, you can be Alex 2.0. I'd watch it.
So fitness has been such a huge part of your life. And you mentioned earlier about narcotics, alcohol, and some more trauma that has happened. How did that play an effect and how did that evolve in your life? And what was the biggest thing you learned from yourself during that time?
Well, I learned that I had a nickname, Fun Guy Dai, right?
Oh,
And that was my nickname. It was like the moniker, right? Like, I remember going to professional trade shows where I'd be a purchaser, right? Like, I'm going to buy equipment for my stores and or negotiate larger purchases for more of our B2B type clientele. And we'd be there, we'd be talking, and the suppliers, I had such a reputation. They'd be like, "Hey, where are you going tonight? Because I want to be there." Like, that was it. And when I really became mindful and aware of that, especially when I started to question, doing this all the time is probably not the best thing, because I wasn't feeling fulfilled and I was feeling rather empty, to be honest, and it was just affecting me emotionally and psychologically, but also physically. It was taking its toll because I was also aging, right? I was getting older and approaching 30 at this point, and I started to realize, like, it's weird how our egos shift, right?
mhm.
In that mid to late 20 period, sort of that 26 to 30, I was proud of that nickname. You know what I mean? Like, I was
Yeah.
like, I'm cool. I'm the dude, like, it's just living in my ego and not realizing that, no one really was taking me necessarily seriously, but they wanted to party with me, and I realized I wasn't doing myself any favors professionally, but also personally. Because also at this point, I'm married. I've got kids, like, I'm also a business owner. I've got a lot of staff and employees, and we're growing, and I've got a lot of responsibilities, and yet I'm living kind of this double lifestyle, and I used to almost brag that, yeah, I work really hard, but I party harder, and just, I remember saying these things, Alex, like, and when I think about it, sometimes I'm like, oh, I get this little like shiver, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I just want to shake it off, and it's weird, right? Like, just how we remember back to certain things that we've done or experienced or maybe said, and our memory is so weird, right? Because if we're not feeling good about ourselves when we're reflecting on that, it doesn't help us feel
Yep.
any better. It tends to get worse, and so during that period, like I mentioned, I sort of went from the food consoling my emotions to alcohol, but also I realized that these people I was starting to get to know and get invited to social events, especially when I moved to Vancouver, I still was dealing with some of this social anxiety from when I was obese. Like, I still was struggling with connecting with people because I lived most of my life as an introvert, even though I
Mhm.
wanted to be extroverted. Okay, like, I see people being extroverted, I'm like, I want that. I want to be that person. But I wasn't sure how to do it. But I did learn early on, if I have a few drinks, wow, I feel like I can talk to anybody right now. I feel like I can be somebody completely different right now. And that was the problem. I got to the point where I preferred being that other person than being me. And that's not a good place to be, so that started to compound. My health was kind of on a decline, but I was always really good at, like, oh, I can just buckle down. I'll have a nice hard reset. I'll work out really hard for the next week or two and I'll be fine, And so it was sort of like this start, stop, continue,
Mhm.
stop, maybe start again, maybe continue, or stop again, and so it was just very staccato, just how I was focusing on my health. And which also made me feel like an imposter a lot of the time, because here I am, especially in Vancouver, I had we talked about personal branding. I was known as the health and wellness guy. I'd be the guy going on the local TV and radio. If they wanted to talk to somebody about health and fitness or lifestyle trends, I was the person that they would call, because I also had a really active and engaged blog and platform. And, so I was sort of that trusted resource. And yet I'm going on and I'm talking about this stuff. But meanwhile, on the flip side, I'm like, come see me on Friday night at the bar. I probably won't be this guy that you're seeing on TV right now. And again, that just eats away and eats away and eats away. And so I became more withdrawn. And by the time I got to 32, it was just like, holy, full crisis mode, you know. I was drinking more and drinking by myself times, like not good, you know. Even being at home looking after my kids with my wife away, I'd be drinking, you know, like. And it was because I would say it was sort of out of boredom, but also out of habit. You know, it was just, I got to a place where I just preferred having the buzz. It just made life seem a little bit more tolerable. And it's weird, right? Because when I reflect on it, Alex, if I'm perfectly honest, life looked really good back then. You know, if anybody would have met me at that point, they'd be looking at, okay, he's got his own company, it's successful, great. He's got a beautiful wife, great kids, you know, he's very active in some other community initiatives, you know, some big fundraisers that I was a part of. Like, I was doing everything right to be perceived a certain way. But on the flip side, I wasn't living like that all the time. So it was just, oh man, it was tough, right? And it got to a place where I just couldn't do it anymore. And my wife got to a place where she couldn't do it anymore. And this is sort of where the TEDx talk takes off and talks to this situation or this moment, similar to the moment that I had with my dad when I was obese coming out of the bathroom. You know, like, I came out knowing that I need to make a shift. Well, you know, the short or long and short of this portion of the story, at 32, almost 33 years of age, my wife had sat me down one morning after I'd been out for an all-night bender. I don't even remember how I got home the night before. And I even woke up on the floor beside her bed. Like, it's not a pretty story, but it's a real story. And most real stories aren't necessarily pretty. So, you know, that's where I was. And, you know, it's about noon and, you know, they're downstairs. My kids and my wife are downstairs in the kitchen and living room area. And I get up and I walk down the hall and then down the stairs, and my wife is just there, and I could tell she's just pissed, you know, like she's well beyond the breaking point. She's broken. I've put her back together with Scotch tape and it's broken again, you know, like it's done. And I could tell, you know, just the way she was looking at me. And so she sat me down. Kids are in the living room watching TV. Dora the Explorer. Awful jingle. I won't say it because it's like it will get stuck in your head. You'll never get rid of it. But they were massive Dora fans at that age. And I remember her sitting me down and it was like, you know, this is not a healthy environment to raise our kids in anymore. You know, like we can't do this anymore. Like your girls, your daughters, our kids need a more stable home environment. They need stability with their parents, you know. And she was just sharing what she was alive and real for her, but what she really wanted for our girls as well as herself. And here's the thing, Alex, someone that's worked in sales most of my adult life, I'm really good at handling objections. Yeah. I'm really good at talking myself out of tough situations. I had nothing at that moment. I couldn't defend myself. I was truly defenseless based on action or lack of action, you know, like just based on who I was and what I kept doing and kept repeating. Because I got really good at always, you know, begging for forgiveness rather than asking for permission, as the cliche goes, right? Like that, yeah. That was me. I was living that. And she just got to a point, she's like, you know, no more. She had endured because she loved me. She saw the potential in me. She married that potential as well as the person that I was. But that person had slowly got a back seat. And she looked at me and she asked me one question. And this is the question, like literally the question that changed everything and got me on this path that I've been on the last 13 years. She looked me in the eyes and she said, Dai, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters? And Alex, you know, pardon the pun, but it was a very sobering question, you know, like both literally and figuratively. Like it was in the moment, I realized the effect that I was having on my kids, on my wife, and everything in my life was all because of my choices and actions. Mm-hmm. Like it's me role modeling what's okay to my kids. You know, I was showing them this is what a man is. This is what a husband is. This is what a business owner is. You know, this is what a community leader is. Like, this is what I was role modeling and living by example and showing them. And to be honest, you know, at the age that they are now, 17 and 19, if a boy comes to our house wanting to date my daughters and they're anything like I was, you know, 12, 13 years ago, I'm not letting them in. You know, like, there's no way. But that's who I was telling them was okay. You know, and as most statistics will show you, kids often end up with people that are very similar to the parents that they had. You know, there's a lot of similarities, and I didn't want who I was back then to be the measuring stick with which they measure other men later, because I set the bar really low. And I was like, no, we're changing that, you know, and that's really where things started to happen. I started by making a commitment to have no drinking, no alcohol for 1 year. That's what it started as. Because up to that point, the longest I'd ever done is like a sober September kind of thing, you know, like a 1 month of not drinking from the age of 18 on, you know, 18 to 33, that 15 years. I think the longest stint I'd ever done is 1 month.
Wow.
Give you some perspective, right? And so I made a commitment to go 1 year, which is a big deal. You know, that's 12x on my most I've ever done. So I thought that was a pretty good commitment. And my wife agreed, you know, and the girls, and I made the commitment to them, but I more importantly made the commitment to myself. And then I just started to do that. I let a few people know about it, and I just started to live and function without alcohol. But here's the thing, I wasn't functioning very well, because now I removed the piece that I had used and associated to deal with my stress, my overwhelm, my anxiety. It was my coping mechanism, my crutch, if you will. I removed the crutches, and I realized, oh, I got a bit of a limp. You know, I can't really function. I can't walk very well. I need to do something about this. And this is where I got to a point where I got raw and real with my wife. Like, I'd never fully disclosed with her my emotional state, because it had never been role modeled to me how to share emotions in a healthy way, how to ultimately be vulnerable, you know, without fear of, you know, any negative repercussions. Like, my relationship with vulnerability at that point was, well, if you're vulnerable, it means you're weak. It means you can be killed, you know, or taken advantage of. So I always thought of the term vulnerability as being a very big negative and not something that we should ever aspire for. This started to shift, especially because of that moment where I broke down and I asked for help, and I asked for her support. And from there, I found a psychiatrist that I worked with for about 4 months. And then I found a counselor that I worked with for about 3.5 months. Over that period of that year, I had changed so much, Alex, like so much, that by the time we got to the end of 1 year, I remember my wife, she's like, wow, you did the whole year. It's amazing. Do you want to celebrate? Should we share a bottle of wine together? And I'm like, you know what? So much change has happened in the last year, and I'm feeling so good. What would it be like to just keep going? Like, what do you think is possible? What if I could just keep going? Now, it's 13 years now, and I don't even think about it. It's my lifestyle that's emerged from this, but it's like wild, you know, like just what has transpired from that one decision, that one commitment, you know, and yeah, change is hard, but it's almost always worth it, you know? And it's not until we get through the hard stuff and are able to look back that we actually recognize that. Because when you're in it, yeah, all you see is it, right? Like, all you see is like, oh my gosh, this is hard. But we're resilient. You know, as humans, we're resilient. It's in our DNA. We've been around for millennia. You know why? Because we're resilient, you know, and my climate change friends, they'll be the first to say we're too resilient as a species, but that's another conversation. We'll let, you know, the documentarians deal with that one. But, you know, we have this ability to endure hard stuff and come out on the other side, evolved, better, stronger, you know, in a better place. And I think sometimes we forget about that. You know, I know I'd have many times, and I'm trying to keep that more front of mind now today. Even every time I encounter a new challenge, it's like, okay, all right, this is hard. I know it, but I've been through harder, you know, and I came out the other side okay. Also, I use an activity that is really cool. And anybody that's listening to this, you might appreciate this. There's a TED Talk by, oh gosh, why am I drawing a blank all of a sudden? 4-Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss. Sorry, I was drawing a blank there. So Tim Ferriss, he did a TED Talk. I think it was his first one. And he talks about this fear setting exercise. And it's this idea of just asking ourselves, you know, and trying to be stoic with it. So we're trying to take the emotion out of this question, but asking ourselves, you know, what is the worst that could happen? You know, like if we start thinking about change usually involves doing things differently than we've done them to now, you know, up to that point. And so change is often going to involve us doing something different, something new, you know?
Yep.
And I always invite people, what was the worst that can happen if you do that? Like, really, what's the worst that can happen? Tell me the worst. You know, and they start rattling off all the worst things. I'm like, okay, well, how likely do you think any of that stuff is that's going to happen? Like, you know, like dying, you know, like, and often they're like, well, I don't think it's that likely. I'm like, great. So what's really the biggest thing holding you back from this? And it ultimately comes down to, well, it's just me. You know, it's just me, you know, and I think that's really cool. As you peel back all the layers, we all ultimately realize it's just us looking at ourselves in a reflection and realizing we're the only thing that's preventing us from often enduring change. And but you got to go through a lot of it to realize it, you know. And every single person that you've ever spoken to, I know, has one of these stories or multiple stories. I know you do, Alex, and I think that's what makes us all so connected in this human experience, is that we're all having these moments.
Yep.
And that's why I love what you're doing, Alex. You're documenting these. You're documenting them. You're creating it. You're making it accessible for all of us to learn through others' examples. And I think it's just absolutely amazing. So yeah. Anyways.
You talked about the 13 years of sobriety that you've been on, which is amazing. And
Thanks.
There's so much temptation out there where anywhere you go. And I made a challenge, not considered alcohol related, but something that took a lot out of me was fast food. And like, it's so easy. You just drive up on any city and you can see like 20 different fast food places. And you see the commercials, you see the ads, the billboards. And when I started my fitness journey, I said I needed to get rid of this because I'm like, oh, I'm working out. I can have a cheeseburger or something. No, that didn't help because basically it just cancels out each other. And so starting last year in April of 2021, I said, I'm not going to have fast food. We're already in June and I still haven't had it. And I'm like, why stop?
Awesome.
Here? And I could not believe I've gone this long because I was with friends the other day watching a baseball game on TV. And you don't know how many ads for fast food come up. And I'm like, oh, that looks good. Then when the game's over, I'm like, I don't need it. I'm just going to go eat something. It's dinner time. Let me make dinner right now. Pull up a steak, start grilling. I'm perfectly fine. But it just shows that there's so much temptation out there. And especially with social media, which plays an effect where I think when you, especially with you being fitness, where it's like, oh, you can have this. It's like, you know, you say that someone's going to take those exact words. And then if it doesn't work out, they're going to get mad at you. So it just shows that there's temptations all over, but we have the power, we have the control to make it happen. You talked about being honest with your wife. As your daughters or your kids getting older, have you been open to them about your struggles and where they can be open to you if they are going through something?
So my wife's been really good. She's quite, so she's the eldest of 5 siblings. And she also lost her mother in a terrible accident when she was 13. So at that point, she had 4 younger siblings. And then, so you can just sort of imagine that she's basically became the matriarch overnight, you know, responsible for her younger siblings. Her dad was dealing with some very serious depression. Obviously, he just lost his love of his life drastically, immediately, without any warning. And he's responsible for 5 kids now by himself, while also trying to run his business, you know, and he's traveling all over. So I can imagine the pressure that was under Christy, but also her father at that time. And, but obviously, you know, her and learning to even thrive, even given those conditions and changes that she was thrust upon her without her choice, right? Like sometimes change, it comes and yeah, we don't want it, but it comes anyways, right? And she just got such an optimistic, but also a positive outlook on change, that she's been much more in the mentor seat with my kids, with our kids, with our daughters. Now that's shifted, especially in the last, I'd say 10 years based on some of the changes, but more importantly, the work that I started doing. And as a result, have our relationship with the kids gotten better? Yes. As our opportunity to talk about more sensitive topics? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're also very fortunate that our eldest daughter, she is just very, very open book with us, almost to a fault. Like, so like, okay, that's TMI. We don't need to know that about you and your boyfriend. But we'd rather it be that way than the opposite.
Yeah.
And so we try. We're very aware that what we do is modeled to our kids, and we've been very.
Sorry, did you say that?
Sorry, every time I slur my S, Siri starts talking to me. So I got to watch my S's. Let me just put it this way. Kids are always growing. I think one of the best parenting tips I can offer anybody is, just remind your kids you're only human. Like they do tend to put us on pedestals, especially when they're younger. And the higher the pedestal, the further we fall.
Yep.
In their eyes, when we do make mistakes, because we will make mistakes. We are fallible. That's just, again, part of the human experience. We make mistakes, but learning to own them and address them. And that's the thing that I've really become much more aware of. And a better example for my kids is I'm much quicker to own when I make mistakes, or I could have done things better. It's not always in the moment, but I'll come around to it usually fairly quickly, at least a lot more quickly than I used to, still a work in progress. I'll be fully honest, but it's constantly improving, and as long as they're seeing me try, they're seeing the progress being made. I found that it's made our relationships very, very solid.
Looking at your journey that you've been on, has there been a fun challenge that you've accomplished? Something that you're like, this has been a dream of mine. I want to do this. We talked about the challenge, the hard challenges, but is there a fun challenge that you've been able to accomplish? Or is there something in the future that you're looking forward towards?
Well, I got one that was fun after I finished it. So let me put it this way. I've always struggled with meditation. All right. I just am one of those people that to sit still and just focus on my breath. Like I just find it really challenging. I enjoy meditation through movement, like walking meditation. I've come to realize that about myself. But I know the power of meditation, what it means to all of us. I mean, just the effectiveness of just getting more oxygen to our body, it's a good thing.
Yes.
We feel better, we feel calmer. It as they say, it calms the nerves. Yes, it does. And I won't get into the science of it, but if you go and look up sympathetic versus parasympathetic and our nervous system and how it functions, you'll learn very quickly that breath is a great way to regulate that. Make yourself feel better in the moment. So we all accept that. We all agree. Okay. Sounds good. Meditation's good. Well, while we were living in Bali, over the last number of years, we lived there for 2.5 years before the pandemic. And while I was living there, I was working with a business coach back in San Diego. And so we would get on these calls. And I remember at this one point, and he was going on this sort of life journey. Well, we'll just say that, like, he's on this self-development journey. So he'd done so much professional development. There was clearly a bit of a bias or a lopside to that. And I know what that's like too. I've been trying to even that out over the last decade, but here he was going on this journey. And he introduced a term to me called Vipassana. Now, for those that aren't aware, Vipassana is a style of meditation, but it's the way that you learn this meditation is by literally committing to doing a 10-day silent retreat where you basically sit on a pillow for 10 days. Okay. You don't talk to anybody. You can't write. There's no electronics. There's no writing devices. You can't read. There's no conversations. It's literally like you're living like a monk for 10 days and learning to meditate. This special style of meditation called Vipassana. I remember him telling me he's going to go do this. And I'm like, dude, you're crazy. There's no way I would ever do something like that. That just sounds painful. Anyways, he came back a couple of weeks later, and we're getting on our call, and I felt like I was talking to Yoda or Buddha, like it was just, just this shift, right? Like there's this shit, like just this complete awareness and calmness in him. And I'm like, I don't know if this is the same guy. Is this my coach? Like, what's going on here? And I was just like, whoa. so that was my first sort of thing where I was like, okay, maybe there is something to this. Anyways, over the next month and a half, I'd had 2 more conversations with other people that I respected that had also had positive experiences doing Vipassanas. And here I am, like, there's no way I would ever do that. And I was saying this out loud. I was telling these people. And then after that 3rd conversation, I'm looking at my wife and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should do a Vipassana. Maybe I'm being called to do this. This is why it keeps coming up in conversation. And I'm like, do you want to do this with me? And she looks at me and she's like, hell no. But she's like, I'll support you if you want to do it. And so I did. I signed up for one. And at that point, I was going to, it was north of Bangkok by about 3 hours out in the jungle, this meditation center and a Vipassana center. And the cool thing about Vipassana, it's all volunteer driven and it's all nonprofit. So you don't actually pay any money to go to it. You just have to be able to commit to literally 11 days. And of course, they ask for a donation at the end. And that's so they can continue to fund these centers. But it's, no one's getting paid for this. It's just to keep things operating. And so people give as much as they feel comfortable to give. And which I thought was just really cool. It makes it extremely accessible to anybody that wants to tap into this type of a thing and get more connected with themselves, because it's also non-secular. Even though Vipassana is Buddhist in origin, it's what the Buddha used when sitting underneath that tree and he discovered Dharma, right? We became enlightened one. And it was literally, he associates this style of meditation to that. But when they're teaching this in the Vipassana centers, they want to make it accessible to everybody. So based on that, they have removed any of the religious undertones. So whether you're a Christian, whether you practice Judaism, it doesn't matter. You can be Hindu. Like it absolutely doesn't matter. We can all benefit from these silent retreats, Vipassana centers. And anybody wants to check it out, vipassana.org is the website, and there's centers all around the world. You just got to sign up to go to one. I'm not associated, other than I've done a couple myself. So, but here's the thing, Alex, it was the hardest challenge that I've ever done, but it was also the most fun afterwards, because after I got through it, meditation's not as intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a little bit easier for me to get to that place now, to get to that centered place, that present place. Of course, you got to keep practicing it. I don't do Vipassanas traditionally the way it's meant to be done, because it's literally an hour in the morning, hour at night. Can you imagine meditating 2 hours every day? Like, that's the traditional way of Vipassana. Now I don't do that, okay? Full disclosure. But during that 10 days, it taught me how to get there, how to become more present, how to be more aware of my own life, also how to calm my mind. And so it was one of the hardest challenges I've ever done. And yet one of the most fun ones based on what it's created for me ever since, and so I highly endorse it. I recommend it. I've got a couple articles and some videos about my experience. It's on my website, daimanuel.com. Just type in Vipassana in the search bar and you'll find it. But, and it's got links. If you want to go check out some of these Vipassana centers, just go find one and just go do it. Because the cool thing is, once you've done a 10-day, you can come back and do a 3-day. You could do a 2-day, or you can come back and do like I think they have one that's like 3 months. I'm like, forget that. I'm not going there. You literally live like a monk for like 3 months, and I should tell people your meals are only vegetarian. You only get 1 meal a day. So you are truly living like a monk, but you're not moving much, right? Like your activity is very, very limited, and it's just, yeah, anyways, it's just a wild experience. And so, yeah, thank you for asking the question. But I would say that was one of the hardest, but also one of the most rewarding challenges I've ever done.
I'm going to be that typical Gen Z person right now. This thing just takes over our life. If I was without it for 1 day, I would probably be going crazy right now.
Yeah, totally. You know what? I get that. I totally get it. And that's why I think it's almost more, it would be even cooler for you to do it. Do you know what I mean, Alex? Like, because I think it's that it's kind of like I looked at it because I was the same, I was the same, like, because a lot of my businesses are run online, and social media is to create relevancy, but awareness, but also attraction, right? Like to bring people to what I do. And so to go 10 days without, or actually it turned out being 12 days of being offline, it was kind of like a forced detox. And it was also nice because it created this distance, and it reminded me that, I can function without that constant stimulus,
Yes.
but for me, it was like that forced detox, because I know I've tried doing digital detoxes as well, without something like that, like even trying to go away to a weekend to a retreat. Yeah, sure. But there's always ways. They still let you keep your phone, and there's ways of like, I'm going to bed. I'll just a quick peek. Like it's tough, right? If it's there and it's accessible. But when you go to do it with a passionate, they take all the devices and all your writing stuff away. They lock them up in a locker, and that's it. And so you're forced to detox, And anyways, just something to consider.
So we talked about kind of future things in a way, and you mentioned some fun challenges you've accomplished. So now we're going to talk about the future. What are you hoping to accomplish both personally and professionally in the next few years?
Well, thanks, Alex. There's a couple on the personal side, and this started actually a year ago today. So I guess just almost a year. It'll be a year tomorrow. I made a shift a year ago to really prioritize my mental health. And when I say prioritize mental health, like I'm someone that, for the last, I'd say 10 years specifically, I've been very good at prioritizing self-care.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken time for myself to work on my health, my well-being. And, there's mental health benefits all along the way, but I got to a place, because last year I had a hernia operation last December. So it would be a year ago, December, I had the hernia operation. So it would have been December, 2021? Yeah, or no, sorry, because we're in 2022. It's a year ago. Sorry, you know what I mean. So it's like is that 2019? Yeah, or 2020?
Was it before the pandemic?
No, it was during the pandemic. It was
so 2020.
2020. Yes, that's right. Thank you. December 2020, I had a hernia operation, and it's called an epigastric hernia. So it's like right in the middle of your abdominal region. Okay. So like you get your sternum right here in the middle, that little bone in between your pecs. You go down about an inch. That's where I had this tear. And I fixed it once 5 years ago. Then I tore it again when living in Bali. And then so eventually when we got back, I got it fixed again. I realized that the doctor, she was, obviously she was a little bit pissed off. Okay. She's like, you tore it in the exact place where you had the injury before. Did you actually let this heal fully? And I was like, of course I did. Like, no, I didn't. Okay. Like I rushed to get back to training, thought, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm good to start up again. But anyways, I tore it again. Right. And so this time I said, I'm going to, truly focus on the recovery aspect. Like I'm going to focus on just getting better again, getting like healing fully. So after the 12 weeks of basically doing nothing, except I would do walks, like I was walking almost daily, but that was the extent of my activity, and after that 12 weeks, I sort of got into a weird place mental health wise. I became a bit depressed, a bit withdrawn. I was struggling getting back into the fitness routine, of actually starting to do more resistance-based stuff and just consistently moving my body with some purpose, right? To create the emotional benefit, the psychological benefit, and also the physical benefit. And I just found myself not doing it. And that went on for another 3 months.
Wow.
And, also at that time I was prepping for the TEDx talk, and I had a couple other projects. And anyways, I can say a lot of excuses, but I wasn't prioritizing my self-care, especially my mental health. And I just slowly started to regress and get worse. And my depression was creeping in. My anxiety was like through the roof. And I got to a place last June where I put a bunch of weight on, wasn't feeling good, feeling really depressed. I wasn't making good choices daily. So I was letting my nutrition slide, eating foods that I would never normally eat, just because it's just not something I would eat. It's just, I just don't, I have a certain way of being very ritualistic based on how I've lived my life. And I found myself disregarding the ritual. And I don't know, we get to this place eventually where we're just like, gosh, can it get any worse? And usually as soon as we start thinking that, it can, And so I was like, you know what? I can't allow for this to get any worse. I just got to draw a line in the sand, as the saying goes, and step over that and let the past be the past. Up to that moment, everything that I was doing is behind me. I'm looking in front. It's a clear beach. There's no footprints. I get to carve the path I want to walk now. And as much as there's a visual there, you can literally do this, right? It's like, okay, right now is the last time I'm going to do this. And now I'm going to start doing this. And it's like, we have a very clear stop and a very clear start or a new beginning. And so then I set in motion, literally, this recommitment to myself to get back to doing some of the ritualistic things that I know were really good for me holistically. And one of those things, was literally me. It's the best way to put this. I basically said, you know what? I'm approaching 45. Just to sort of put this in perspective, I was approaching 45 at the end of the year. This was now June of last year. And I was like, okay, well, I've got until November. In the next 5 months, or even if I gave myself till the end of this year, in the next 6 months, what would it be like ending this year as my healthiest self? And what would it look like if I prioritize my mental health a bunch above all else? What would that also do? So I had those hypotheses, and I just got to work trying to figure out what that could look like. Like what would it be like to be my healthiest version to end the year on? And what would I feel like if I did that? What kind of choices or rituals would I need to be enforcing or repeating regularly? Mm-hmm. And so I got to work and experimented. And here's the craziest thing. Nothing felt hard. Like I remember, I mean, I don't know if you can relate to this, Alex, we make these shifts because you've lost a lot of weight too, and when you make that decision to lose weight, we just go and we lose the weight. But it's tough to sustain that sometimes, right? Like that commitment, because it's not our normal yet, so it involves discipline because it hasn't become a habit or a ritual, really a lifestyle yet. So we have to constantly be disciplined to say, no, we're going to do that. We're choosing to do that. We're choosing to do that. Eventually it gets to a point where it's like, oh, I love doing this and I get to do this. And, I'm just doing it. I'm not thinking about it anymore, but it takes time. And I ended up, by the end of the year, literally the fittest and healthiest I've ever been in my entire life at 45 years of age. And it felt the easiest than it ever has to get that healthy. Like I remember before, I'd have to watch everything I ate. I'd have to count my macros, I'd have to watch how much training I was doing and make sure I do X amount of lifting versus X amount of cardio. Like, I would have to engineer the perfect plan to achieve the kind of results that I got. But here I had no real plan. I just moved my body every day a little bit, always, right? And I also focused on my emotions as well as my nutrition. I made sure I walked every day, did something that, made my mental health feel good and accomplished and productive. And it was just one day after the next, it just slowly built up this great momentum. And why I'm sharing this is I think the mental health piece is so critical that that's the best place to begin any lifestyle changes people want to make. And I didn't always believe that, to be honest. I always used to say, well, I'll just sort of, the fake it till you make it. Just start working out, start changing what you eat, and everything will get better. Yes and no. If you're not putting some habits in place to really give that mental health and that self perspective a shift, in a positive way, the other stuff's really hard to sustain long term. It doesn't become a lifestyle because we're not really accepting of it yet. And so that's all what I discovered, and it was fun, and so where I'm going with this in the future is that this Merge 60 program is what I ended up entitling it. I documented everything that I did. I just had my first beta group of 10 guys go through it, all got phenomenal results. And I was like, awesome. Awesome. This works, like not just for me, but it works for other people. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm really optimistic to really bring this and make it accessible to people, but also just give them something that does show them some better habits to really prioritize mental health first, and build a community around that. So that's what I'm really excited about for the future, at least on the immediate next 6 months. And outside of that, personally, I've just committed again, as mud run races are starting to happen, or OCR, obstacle course races are starting to happen again in Canada, because with COVID they basically pulled chute. There hasn't been Tough Mudder or Spartan, any of them up here for the last 2 years. They've just announced all the races this year or what's left, and I just committed to the Super Beast at the end of August. And the Super Beast, for those that don't know, it's like a half marathon distance over 30 obstacles. It's done by Spartan. And I just committed to it because I like to have a personal challenge. It's something that always keeps me motivated, keeps me on point with my own commitment to my health and well-being, is having usually at least a quarterly challenge. So every 3 months, I like to have something I'm sort of working towards. Because it just helps me keep forward momentum.
Yep.
I know I'm building into something. I know I've got something I've committed to. And so it helps me stay focused on the right now as well. And so that's on the immediate, on the personal side. I'm really excited about that, to get back to those kind of challenges that can be a lot of fun. If you're someone that likes to get dirty, likes to challenge yourself, and you like to have a lot of fun with a lot of people, I think mud run races are just a great opportunity to do all those.
The final question I'll ask you, for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Well, I think first and foremost is getting clear on what your true values are. And I've heard the term, and I think we all have this idea of core values. It's the things that are non-negotiable in our lives. You know what I mean? Like the things that we truly value as being the most important aspects to us, often to even how we associate to other people, because values is where a lot of trust can be formed, but also connections can be formed. When we meet other people with similar values, there's an instant bond, a connection, a trust factor, a friendship, if you will, either personally, professionally, or often both. But I find a lot of people just haven't created enough space for themselves to even ask the question, what are some of my core values, core principles? What are things that I would never negotiate on? And just to give you an example, for me, it's like family. Family is a core value. My fitness is a core value, because it's a direct correlation into my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health, my spiritual health, even all benefits from my fitness. Family, fitness, faith, having a strong sense of purpose in life, or a strong enough why. And I find that's where that faith connection can really be empowering. But also, finances. It's something that I think we all need to establish a healthier relationship with financial health, right? And people often say, well, is that a core value? I'm like, well, to live, with fiduciary responsibility, being responsible with your money, I think is a very important thing, because I see so many people dealing with negative health, adverse effects based on financial stress. So if you don't make it a focus, it won't change. It won't improve. And that's why I make it a non-negotiable. It's because I don't live in a culture where barter is the norm, I wish it was, I wish we could just barter and exchange everything and just exchange energy and help each other. And that would make the world go round. I know it's rather naive, might as well sing Kumbaya now, but it's not the world we live in. And we do live in a world that works on a global economy. We got to learn how to play within that sandbox. So if we don't make it important, it won't be, and it won't change, it won't get better. And I see too many people, and I'm included in that lot. I mean, up until my mid 30s, I was very financially irresponsible, but the last 10 years, we've really worked on that. My wife and I, with our family, we've really made it a priority. And it's created a lot of extra space to work on other areas of our life, because when you don't have that financial stress and that burden weighing you down, you do feel lighter. You do feel more confident and able to do other things. Focus on other aspects in your life that you want to focus on. So those are just examples of some of the core values, and I invite people, figure out what yours are, because once you know that, it gives you direction.
Yep.
And with clarity comes confidence. And with confidence, there's less excuses. The easiest way to kill procrastination is through confidence and doing. By taking action, we also reinforce the confidence and the belief systems, which also helps us gain more clarity, and vice versa, back to the confidence, back to action. So these are all those aspects that I think once you find that clarity in this, in your relationship with what I'm talking about, it can open up just nothing but opportunity and potential. And it's a great way to start your journey. So to answer your question, I think that's sort of the beginning and where I would invite people to start.
Well, Dai, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we're excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Alex, thank you. And honestly, thank you for creating this. You know, your platform's amazing, but also, you know, rising to the challenge is just, it gives everybody the benefit to learn from one another, because we all have different challenges, but many of the challenges are the same, you know, and we just need a platform to share those challenges, because I know there's people out there like, oh my gosh, I got that one too, you know, me too, you know, and we're all in similar journeys. It's just some of us might be a few steps ahead. So what better way to avoid those pitfalls than by sharing these stories on this kind of a platform? So thank you for creating this space for us. You know, it's amazing. It really is.